As you know, C.A.R. Releases forms in June and December of every year. And for a long time, we had buyer representation agreement, 4 different buyer representation agreements. We had sellers that were questioning why they are paying buyers agents, and then there were buyers that were asking and inquiring, the amount of commission that their agents were making. That created a lawsuit between DOJ and NAR, and some forms were updated and recreated, or new forms were created in order to meet those inquiries and all that. So having said that, I'm going to start with the new forms today. We're going to cover as much of it as we can today. The rest of it is going to go for next week. Hopefully, we'll do all the new forms today. Next week, we're going to do the updates to the RPA. So the very first form that we're going to be talking about is the new buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. It's a 3-page contract. It replaces 3 of the buyer representation agreements. That's the BRE, BRNE, and BRNN. The 4th one that it doesn't replace, that's a representation for no compensation. And that is still going to be available, but I don't think anybody is going to use it. So the new buyer representation and broker compensation agreement is the BRBC, okay? It's a lot of language came from our listing agreement, okay? Paragraph 1, unlike the listing agreement, that it ends at a certain date, okay? This one has number of days. So it can start today and it could end in 30 days or so, okay, whatever that you put in there. And that 30 days could be a Saturday, could be a Sunday, could be a holiday, just like our listing agreement. It does not have to be a performance day, all right? Paragraph 4B1, okay? The form defaults into a non-exclusive representation, meaning that the broker is only entitled to be paid if the buyer purchases a property for which there were broker involvement. So what's a broker involvement? Broker involvement is explained right over here in this paragraph over here. Broker involvement is if the buyer physically entered and was shown a property by broker, broker showed the property to the buyer virtually, broker submitted to seller a signed written offer from the buyer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. And number 4, the property was introduced to buyer by the broker. However, just sending a buyer a list of properties does not mean broker involvement. So if you have a prospecting thing and the prospecting program automatically sends list of properties to the buyer, that's not broker involvement, okay? I'll stop at the end of this form for any questions. Paragraph 4B2, if you check this box, the optional paragraph creates an exclusive representation, meaning that the broker is entitled to be paid if the buyer purchases a property during the representation period, whether the broker was involved in it or not, okay? So that's just like our listing agreement. We have exclusive right, okay? And on paragraph B1 is non-exclusive, okay? 4C, paragraph 4C allows either party or seller to cancel the agreement. Either the broker or the seller can cancel the agreement, okay? Paragraph 4D1 retains a language from previous buyer representation that any compensation received by buyer's broker from any source shall be credited towards buyer's obligation to pay compensation. Paragraph 4E is your protective period, just like our listing agreement. When the listing expires, if you have, how long is your protective period for the buyers that you work with during that listing period? This is exactly the same thing. So if you have worked with someone or you put in here 180 days, 90 days or whatever, Okay, those properties that you showed to this buyer, if they purchase it, they have to pay you a commission, or ultimately, hopefully, they're going to come back and they're going to purchase it through you. Paragraph 4A, paragraph 4F. This paragraph obligates the buyer's broker to disclose to the buyer the compensation the broker expects to obtain from others on any particular property. And there's a new form for it called ABCD. And we're going to go over that form today as well. Okay. So this is the main body of the new buyer representation agreement. The next 2 pages are taken from our listing agreement. And if you know our listing agreement, you have to not to worry about the next 2 pages at all. Any questions on this form, please?
Rick?
Yes.
So it looks like the box is checked for the agency disclosure. Is that automatically bundled if you pull this listing, if the form is pulled up?
Yes. Yes. Agency disclosure is the very first thing that is going to come up. Yeah.
So it is bundled.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. No other questions. Let's move on to the next form. Okay. The next form is the cancellation of buyer representation. We just went over it. You know, you have a contract and either party wants to cancel. This is the form that you use. It is just like our cancellation of agreement or cancellation of escrow. One party wants to cancel, notifies the other party that I am canceling, and the second party will agree. And the second part of this paragraph 3, okay, of the form identifies the compensation that would be due to the broker, and it reverts back to BRBC form and applies to any applicable property purchased or only those for which there were broker involvement. So the same way that we have a cancellation of agreement, the first part cancels, the second part, you know, both parties agree to cancel, and then the buyer pays a portion of the deposit to the seller or whatever on our cancellation. This is the same thing, okay? It's got the same kind of a language in it. And sometimes, you know, you're working for a buyer, you're sending postcards out, you're incurring expenses or whatever. Maybe you're going to be able to recuperate your expenses. That's in paragraph 3B, okay? The next new form, okay, that we're going to talk about is notice of broker involvement properties, okay? At the time, this form would be used at the termination of the buyer representation period if a protection period was provided, or within 5 days after either buyer or broker cancels the BRBC. Just like the current form that we have with the listing, that we give list of buyers, this one we're giving list of properties that there was a broker involvement with the buyer. Okay. The next form, anticipated broker compensation disclosure, 1-page form. This is a 3-part form. Part 1 advises the buyer that the seller payment of compensation, whether it's through MLS, CBC, CA, or any other form. Okay. And the buyer's broker is going to get either directly or indirectly from the seller or from the agent. Part 1, disclosure may be made in disclosure may be made in part 2 of the form or through a copy of the MLS printout. So every time that you're given an MLS printout and it shows that buyer's broker is getting 2.5%, that's good enough. Okay. But if you need to make sure, you can put the property address here and date shown and the compensation offered through MLS, whatever, that's going to go over here. Okay. And part 3 is where the buyer broker discloses the final compensation received. So as of January, you probably have to use this. Every time when you're representing a buyer, at least this last portion must be used just to show the buyer's the buyers, how much the buyer broker has earned in that transaction. Questions? Yes, Carmen.
Rick, my question is this. Now, this is the disclosure you're making if the buyer is paying a part of your commission or all of your commission, or if you're receiving anything from the seller side.
Well, the buyers have been asking, part of the class action lawsuit is for the buyer to know how much their agent is making. So this is basically disclosing to the buyer how much their agent is making. So whether you use the buyer broker agreement or not, it would be a good practice to use this.
This is at the beginning of the transaction that they would sign, or during, when would this form be utilized in the transaction?
If you're going to do the final compensation, I would do it sometimes towards the end of it, because if you're giving any kind of credit, if there is any negotiations, whatever, it's in here. If you're writing an offer, you can put it right over here. Buyer's initial property address. I'm expected to get paid for this amount of money. Okay.
Expected to get paid that amount of money from the buyer?
This is how much you're expected to get paid, either from the MLS, from CBC, or the buyer.
I see. And I think I had another question too. If you go up the form, it will come to me. Where was it? Probably the previous form.
This is the cancellation, and this is the first form, BRBC.
Okay. All right. I can't think what it was. Thank you. I'm good.
But write down all the questions, because next week when we're going to go over the RPA, a lot of questions are going to be clarified. Okay? But today we're just going to go over some of the forms.
Are these forms somewhere that we can print so that we can go through it?
I have the forms. I have the forms. I have sent it to the office, to David. Okay, you can request it from David, or if anybody would email it to me, I'll be happy to send them to you. If not, you go to C.A.R.'s website. You can download it from there as well.
Thank you.
Rick, this is Mike Napolitano. Can I jump in?
Yes, of course.
I was just on it with one of my agents, and C.A.R. So you go to CAR.org. Don't sign in. What you do is go over to the search button, type in new forms, and it'll take you to a page where you get to go select. They've got quick guides. They've got these, and I think you'll be able to follow it all from there. I mean, certainly you can do the other, but you can go get this, and C.A.R. has it there. And just if I may make one comment on that, on that ABCD form, it is not a required form. It is a form where we're preparing for the some kind of requirement coming out of a settlement with NAR and the DOJ, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah, it's not. None of these forms are required. Right. You don't have to use the buyer broker agreement come December 18. Okay, but if you find a property that is in Zillow or somewhere else and there is no compensation in there, and you want to make sure that you're going to get paid, you either do a CBC or you do a CA or you do some kind of an agreement. Or if you want to put it as part of the purchase agreement, you can use the buyer broker agreement and get an authorization from the seller, from the buyer, to include it in the purchase agreement. So that way you're going to get paid. But none of these forms are going to be required to use as of December 18. But if you want to, I got calls. I have received calls. Some buyer asking, how much was my agent making, because they don't know. They're thinking that the agent is making millions of dollars or whatever. But this just clarifies. And I have received calls from seller after seeing the escrow instruction why am I paying the buyer's agent when the buyer's agent does not represent my interest? So those are the issues. Okay.
And
All right.
by the way, Robert has put up the link on chat if you want to look at it. Go ahead, Rick.
All right. Thank you. So the next form is seller payment for buyer broker. So you have a buyer broker agreement and you write an offer. There is going to be a paragraph added in your current purchase agreement. It's going to be paragraph 3G3. Okay. And when you click that, it is going to bring this form up. Okay. And basically it's this form will be used to identify the amount of compensation the buyer is asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker. Okay. The buyer's broker will not receive double payment because, as we went over the agreement before, whatever that the seller pays gets credited towards whatever the buyer is going to pay. Okay. So buyer's payment for seller's payment for buyer's broker, form SPBB. When we go over the purchase agreement next week, you're going to see that there is a paragraph that you can attach these to there. The question came up, a lot of questions came up that, you know what, the MLS shows 2.5%, or 2% or whatever dollar amount. Can an agent ask the listing agent to pay more or whatever? Normally you shouldn't, you don't, because it's against MLS rules and regs to ask for more compensation from the listing agent. But this is not asking compensation from the listing agent. This is asking for the seller to pay the buyer's broker. Okay. This is going to clarify a lot of questions with the sellers who have concerns why they are paying, and if they knew or they didn't know, or if it was all hidden in the listing agreement. The next new form is the buyer single agency addendum. It's a one-page form. If the buyer's broker works for a brokerage that will only represent the buyer, then you can use this form. And I don't think any one of us are doing buyer brokers only. None of our agencies in our town or in our area are doing that. But if you were, then you could use this one. It's a buyer single agency addendum. Okay. The next new form, solar advisory and questionnaire. Okay. This is a new form. It has two parts. Paragraphs 1 through 5 are just advisories. Okay. And the second part consists of 20 questions, 20 questions that a seller should answer to the extent that seller is actually aware of the issues. These questions include information about the age of system, size of the system, whether the batteries are part of the system, how much money is still owed, and all that, because some sellers know, some sellers don't know, some agents ask, some agents don't, and it creates problems later on. It's a good form to use. That's the seller advisory, solar advisory and questionnaire. The next form is the buyer transaction advisory. This form is bundled with BRBC and gives a buyer more information about an agent and buyer's representation. The next form, it's a little bit too late, but it's an advisory on non-contingent offer. The last form that I'm going to talk about today is rental property owner disclosure, PROD. It's 4-page. This is a new form. It is just like our SPQ, okay, but it's for a rental property owner, and asks about owner's knowledge for 8 statutory disclosures, such as pest control, lead-based paint, death on the property, and it has 19 other non-statutory disclosures that you ask. It is just like our SPQ. Any questions? Yes, Ira.
On that solar form, it went by pretty quick, but is there a spot on there where if the solar panels have ever had to be repaired, that the seller would disclose that? Because it might not be on the TDS.
I don't think that there is any questions in there if the solar panel has been repaired. I'll make a note and I'll take it on January to the standard form committee to add. I don't think it's there.
That would be great, because the seller's probably not gonna mark that on the TDS.
Yeah. Okay.
And so if we're gonna fill this out, it makes perfect sense to have that disclosure made here.
Yeah. I don't think we talked about it. I don't think it's in there. All right. But
Okay,
it's
well-
very good suggestion. I'll take it to the standard forms.
But it
Appreciate
belongs,
it.
but Ira, it belongs in the TDS.
It should when it talk, but sellers may not be thinking about it. That was my
Well,
whole point.
that's where our advice comes in then. That's all.
Thank you, Mike. All right,
Rick, can I ask
so-
you a quick question?
Sure.
This form, when it says for rental properties, does it apply to single families as well?
Yes.
If they're rental?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Greg. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands. Rick, as always, your information is always so
Thank you.
valuable, and we appreciate your doing this and taking all of the time that it takes to deal with C.A.R. and not deal with, that makes it sound like it's a bad thing. Take the time
Thank you, Mr.
to do
President.
what you do for us. Thank you again.